down, and we have one last thing that we need to go over. Let's do so not only do I want you to solve for what x is, all the possible values of x, I want you to graph it when you're done as well. Okay, so I want you to graph it when you're done as well. So pause the video and try this out, see how you do. All right, so let's get our mirror going. Let's solve this. Remember, we're going to undo any addition or subtraction first. So subtract 5, subtract 5. These 5's cancel out. This gives me 21. And then I bring down the 3x, okay, because I didn't touch it. Now, since it says 3x, that means 3 times x, and to undo multiplication, we need to do some division. Well, 3's cancel out, which just gives me x is greater than or equal to 21 divided by 3 is 7. And now I can graph this. 0, 1, oops, that's not a 1. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So if x is greater than or equal to 7, I'm going to use a filled in circle. And since all the values have to be equal to or greater than 7, the direction greater than 7 is to the right. All right, last thing now. Very last thing. If I have an inequality, let's say 8. In this case, it says negative 2x is less than 8. Okay, it's a one-step inequality. Easy. Obviously, you all know that you have to do what? We have to divide by negative 2, right? That's what we're going to get rid of. To get x by itself, we have to divide by negative 2. Now, some of you might be saying, well, what if I just divided by 2? Well, if I divide by 2, that's fine. I'm going to show you what happens if you divide by 2 as well. So if I divide by negative 2, remember, negative 2 is the opposite of 2. So I want you to think about that. If I divide by negative 2, these negative 2's cancel out. I'm just left with x. 8 divided by negative 2 is a positive divided by a negative. A positive divided by a negative is a negative, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. But remember, we didn't divide by 2. We divided by the opposite of 2, which is negative 2. And since we divided by the opposite of 2, what have I not placed into my inequality yet? The inequality symbol. Well, earlier, it said negative 2x is less than 8. Then I told you we divide by the opposite of 2. Since we divide by an opposite number or a negative number, we actually have to flip this to its opposite. So if it was a less than symbol, the opposite of a less than symbol is a greater than symbol, okay? Because I want you to think about getting the opposite of everything right now. The opposite of the 2 and the opposite of the inequality. Now, if I solve this the other way, remember how I said that you could divide by 2? It's going to look like this. Let's make our mirror. If I divide by 2, the 2's cancel out, but I have a negative divided by a positive, which leaves me with negative 1x, and 8 divided by 2 is 4. Well, another way of saying negative 1 times x is just negative x, okay? Negative 1 times positive x gives me negative x. The same way that negative 1 times 3 gives me negative 3, negative 1 times 5 gives me negative 5, negative 1 times x, because remember, x doesn't have a negative in front of it, is negative x. Well, if I read this, I can read this in two ways. I can read this as negative x is less than 4, or I can read this as the opposite of x is less than 4. Well, if the opposite of x is less than 4, then x has to be the opposite of what this says, right? Well, don't forget that to get the opposite of x, we have to multiply by negative 1. So how do I get rid of this times negative 1? I have to divide by negative 1 or multiply by negative 1 on both sides. These negatives cancel out. Let's use black. These negatives cancel out. I'm just left with x. I use the negative 1 to divide it into 4. That gave me negative 4. And since I was dealing with opposites, I have to flip my inequality to its opposite, which went from less than to greater than. Okay? So that being said, your rule that you need to know for inequalities is, and I'll type this out because my handwriting is not very good. If you solve for x and need to divide or multiply by a negative number, your inequality will flip the other way. So just like earlier, it said less than originally, it became greater than. If it had said greater than and we divided both sides by a negative, it would have then said less than. Okay, it just depends on whether or not you are multiplying or dividing both sides of your inequality by a negative number. In the earlier examples, we did not multiply or divide by a negative number. They were all positive, so we left everything alone. But here, we had a negative. We had to divide by a negative, or an opposite, which meant we had to get the opposite inequality symbol. It said less than, it became greater than. This is always going to be true. And you can test this out. Remember, it said 2x, what was the rest of it? Negative 2x is less than 8. Negative 2x is less than 8. We ended up saying that x had to be greater than negative 4. Okay? Well, let's say you didn't flip it, right? Don't put the wrong answer in red. Let's say that we said x had to be less than negative 4. Well, let's test out a number from each of these sets. There's a bunch of numbers here. If x is greater than negative 4, there's an infinite amount of values x can be, right? It can be negative 3, negative 2, negative 1, 0, 1, 2, 3, a billion. Here, if it's less than negative 4, it has to be the left of negative 4, which means it could be negative 5, negative 6, negative 10, negative 20, negative 3,000. Let's see what happens when we test this. Well, let's choose, for example, for the left side, if x is greater than negative 4, let's choose 10, right? 10 is greater than negative 4. 10 is greater than negative 4. So let's use 10. So let's substitute 10 in for this x. If I rewrite this, it now says negative 2 times 10 is less than 8. Well, negative 2 times positive 10 gives me negative 20. is less than 8. Is that true? Does this check? Yeah, negative 20 is definitely less than 8. Okay, so let's choose a number on the other side. X is less than negative 4. Now I'm going to use negative 10 because negative 10 is less than negative 4. All right, so now I'm going to plug in this negative 10 into the same X. I'm going to substitute it for X. So negative 2 times negative 10 is less than 8. If this statement of X is less than negative 4 is correct, then this should work. Well, negative 2 times negative 10 is positive 20. Is positive 20 less than 8? No, it's not. So this is wrong. Okay. This is why when you divide by a negative on both sides or you multiply by a negative on both sides, you need to flip your inequality. Because otherwise, if you keep it, your answer is going to be wrong. I know this was a lot to digest. Try all this out. Let me know if you have any questions. I'm here.